Radio Play Comics is meant to adapt the stories mostly of great unadapted old and forgotten comics from the past. I use voice acting and narration to abridge the work as much as possible without lessening its impact, and to bring these stories to life the best way I can. Please enjoy. Hi, I'm Nick, and welcome to the Fusion Space for today's episode of Radio Play Comics, Before Watchmen, Ozymandias. Before Watchmen was a series of prequel comics to the original Watchmen, further developing its characters and revealing a bit more of the world's history, and their own. Nothing here is meant to change or break the canon set by Watchmen, only to fill in some of the many blank spots in ways that feel congruous with the main book. There is no overarching narrative, and the books only tie into each other in small ways, so any can be enjoyed on their own. I'll be adapting them all eventually, spaced out with my other long-running series, and in this order most likely, ordered as they begin chronologically. Minutemen tells the story of the origin of superheroes in this world and the first team who operated in the 1940s, their rise and fall, and the secret dark history behind the happy public face of their story. Ozymandias is a chilling portrait of a villain in the making, and his is a series of heartbreaks given to him by the world, hardening his heart while sharpening his mind. It's a grim road he walks, but he is also undoubtedly the most effective hero of his time. Comedian is another walk into darkness as he changes through several wars and changes in power in the government, while Dr. Manhattan's view is of the universe itself and the largest scale as he mucks with quantum physics and time. Night Owl shows his origins and the team of himself and Rorschach in action in their early days, while Rorschach's book focuses on his time alone in the 70s, and one brief window of his life, as does Silk Spectre's but in the 60s and her youth, while Dollar Bill and Moloch both tell their life stories. So you can see there's a wide range of styles of story being told, and in a great variety of ways. We'll see the full course of Adrian Veidt's life, from learning karate to deal with bullies as a child and overperforming in school, to his traveling the world in Alexander's footsteps as a young man, returning home and building his fortune and his business empire as well as forging his superhero career, revolutionizing the world with new technologies and playing a role in historical events, all the way to his development of his plan to save the world from nuclear war with his false alien attack, and ending right before the story of Watchmen begins. If there's any one prequel you'd like to follow into the main book, this would most likely be the best one to do so with. Of course, we'll also be examining Adrian's character along the way. The unique way he views the world is reflected in the book's gorgeous art style by Jay Lee, which evokes a sense of impossible perfection and unearthly beauty, and whose panel design brings to mind orderly procession and meticulous planning with its tightly regimented geometric shape. Len Wein captures the character and his run of cold and calculating thoughts perfectly with his writing, and both work together in a way often only seen when the writer and artist are the same person. It's a very well-crafted book and a very interesting story. So, without further ado, let's begin. Chapter 1. I Met a Traveler. Adrian Veidt, better known to some as Ozymandias, sits with his genetically engineered lynx Bubastis before his array of monitors, tuned to all stations in his Antarctic base of Karnak, and activates a tape recorder. October 11th, 1985. It occurs to me in these final minutes before I undertake my great mission that perhaps I ought to record and explain the events that have led me to this moment, on the minuscule chance that I am not successful in my efforts, and thus do not return. Unlikely, granted, given I have prepared for every possible eventuality, but even the world's smartest man has been known to make an error now and then, and it always remains for history in the end to determine the rightness of my efforts. Like it or not, history will always have the final word. If one were to seriously consider it, I have already accomplished an extraordinary amount for one brief lifetime. I have accumulated more money than any one man could possibly hope to spend in several lifetimes. I have gone places scientifically that few have been able to follow, and none have been able to duplicate. Haven't I, sweet Bubastis? He pets his giant cat. Yet, despite all my greatest efforts, mankind continues to roll headlong towards its own destruction, and it seems I have spent a lifetime unintentionally learning all that I would need to know to perhaps force our salvation. Adrian closes his eyes and casts his memory back as far as it will go. In late 1938, as the shadow of Nazism swept across Europe, my parents booked passage on one of the last freighters to safely leave the old country. They arrived in New York Harbor in January of 1939. In the old country, my father had run a successful perfumery and quickly established one here as well. But it was not merely business that brought them to these shores. No, my father had determined to leave for America the same day he learned my sweet mother was pregnant with me. How else, after all, he reasoned, could I ever hope to become president unless I were born in the United States? And so I was, and was christened Adrian Alexander Veidt. Alexander after Alexander of Macedonia, one of my father's childhood heroes. By the time I was 2, it was clear to my parents that I was no ordinary child. The toddler Adrian has spelled the word genius with his blocks. At the age of 4, self-taught, I had read all 24 volumes of my father's precious encyclopedias, and was hungry for as much more knowledge as I could absorb. Knowledge is power, Sir Francis Bacon had said, and I could not have agreed more. When I turned 6 and entered public school, I was given an aptitude test along with all the other students, and scored so high above the curve that my parents were called to school to discuss the results. The principal told my parents that my test scores were so high as to be impossible, and insisted that I had somehow cheated. It took all of my father's considerable powers of persuasion to convince her the test results were only a fluke and would not be duplicated in the future. Later, at home, with great reluctance, my father told me that I would have to maintain a low profile from here on. Learn to restrain myself so others would not realize just how smart I really was. The last thing I needed, he said, was to be thought a freak. "But, father, it isn't fair," I said. "Why must I be the one to hide my light under a bushel?"
"Sadly, my boy, life is never fair," said my father as he stroked my silken hair. "What matters is to get through it alive."
From a poster on his bedroom wall, the Thing from outer space looks down on Adrian with one large, baleful eye, wreathed with tentacles. I spent the next 4 years struggling to be as innocuous as possible. I kept my grades average, participated in no sports, and made no friends. All I wanted to do was get through grade school unnoticed. But, sadly, all that accomplished was to make me more of a target.
"Yo, Veidt, nice-looking sandwich. Hand it over."
"Go away and leave me alone, Jerry. I'm eating."
"Not anymore, you ain't freak."
Jerry knocks the sandwich from Adrian's hands.
"From now on, your lunch is mine."
To emphasize his point, Jerry and his cronies proceeded to beat me to a bloody pulp.
"And you're gonna get the same every day, creep, until you finally learn your place around here."
When I got home that day, bruised and battered, my father was filled with a rage I had never before seen in him.
"This is unacceptable. I will go to your school and speak to your principal about this."
Adrian's mother washes his face with a cloth.
"Thank you, Papa, but no. I must deal with this in my own way, in my own time."
The following afternoon, with money I'd saved from a morning newspaper route, I enrolled in a local dojo and took my first hesitant steps toward dealing with my unpleasant problem. Young Adrian follows a sign reading, "Learn how to fight from a real Oriental Kung Fu master." For the next several months, every day at lunch, the pattern repeated itself. Jerry and his cronies would steal my meal, and then pummel me relentlessly, as our teachers turned a blind eye. And every evening, as my parents tended to my wounds and threatened to take action, I would simply say,
"Patience. I promise this will all be over soon."
In less time than it had ever taken any other student, I graduated the dojo with honors. And the following noon, at lunch recess,
"It's that time again, Veidt. Hand over your sandwich."
"Go away, Jerry. This little game of yours has begun to bore me."
"Hey, this'll be over when I say it's over, freako."
Jerry shoves Adrian.
"I am quite serious, Jerry. If you are wise, you will go away and stop bothering me. I will not warn you again."
"That's it, creep.
I'm gonna knock your head.
Jerry swings, and Adrian ducks the wild blow.
Ooh. Hey, stand still, you little creep. Now that wouldn't be terribly smart, would it?
He assumes a ready stance.
If this is how you want it, so be it. But do remember, you were warned. Screaming in adolescent fury, Jerry lunged at me, his flailing fists coming nowhere near me. I slowed my breath as I'd been taught, focused all my energy, and lashed out with my right foot, catching Jerry solidly along the side of his right kneecap and shattering it. Ah! Jerry collapsed in a fetal ball, clutching his ruined knee, mewling like an infant. And, as I turned to deal with his sidekicks, I found them making record time, running for the county border. The lesson had been learned. Jerry's parents were quite upset, as they were informed he may have a permanent limp. I was only angry that Father had to donate a sizable sum to the school to keep me from being expelled. Still, from that day forward, I stopped hiding my light under that proverbial bushel. At the age of 14, with my proud parents watching, I graduated high school cum laude. 3 years later, I was taking postgraduate courses at Harvard, majoring in the brief but remarkable life of my namesake, Alexander of Macedonia. I'd read every one of the many volumes available on the subject, and felt I had but barely begun to even scratch the surface, when my life took a sudden and terrible turn.
Mr. Veidt?
Later, please. I'm occupied at the moment.
Mr. Veidt, it's your parents, I'm afraid.
My parents?
There was a terrible traffic accident, I'm told. They were both killed instantly.
Adrian leaves a single rose on each of his parents' graves.
After the funeral, I found myself standing at a bizarre crossroads. My inheritance offered lifelong idle luxury, and yet, needing nothing, I burned with a paradoxical urge to do everything. I needed advice, and I knew just where to find it. I spent the next few weeks in the antiquities wing of the local museum, standing before the bust of Alexander of Macedonia on display there, locked in silent communion. There was so much I did not know, so much I needed yet to learn. How had someone so young come so close to uniting such an ancient, primitive world? How did one man drag a civilization bare-handed from the blood and filth of such utter barbarity? For days, my only answer was silence. Then, a soft, commanding voice whispered, "Answers cannot be given. They must be learned." And, that simply, the course of my life was set. I became determined to measure my success against his. Firstly, I gave away my inheritance to several worthy charities, to demonstrate the possibility of achieving anything, starting from nothing. Next, I booked passage on a freighter for northern Turkey to retrace my hero's steps.
Adrian boards the large ship and sails across the ocean to seek his destiny.
I thought I wanted to match his accomplishment, bringing an age of illumination to a benighted world. In truth, I think I just wanted to be able to have something to say to him, should we ever meet in the Hall of Legends. Weeks later, I debarked the freighter in a small port city along the Black Sea coast, the stale air there thick with the stench of desperation and need. As I walked the filthy streets in search of some place to spend the night, I could almost taste the gnawing hunger, forever a part of the ancient grime. And as the local predators rose up silently behind me, perhaps sensing easy prey, I decided to warn them. "Don't even think about it," I said softly in my best Turkish. And, perhaps recognizing a greater predator than themselves, they paused, their greed just a hair's breadth behind me, then turned and slunk quietly back into the shadows whence they had come. I walked on, alone. At first I followed the path of Alexander's war machine along the Black Sea coast, imagining his armies taking port after port. Strangely, before subduing Phoenicia, he had struck north toward Gordium, perhaps because of the challenge it represented. The ancient world's greatest puzzle lay there, a knot that could not be untied. Alexander simply cut it in two with his sword. Lateral thinking even then, centuries ahead of his time. Heading south, he entered Egypt through Memphis, where they proclaimed him son of Ammon, judge of the dead, whose name means the Hidden One. Under rule from Alexandria, the classic culture of the great pharaohs was restored. I followed him through Babylon, up through Kabul to Samarkand, then down the Indus, where he first encountered elephants of war. Where he'd turned back to quell dissent at home, I traveled on, through China and Tibet. Alexander returned finally to Babylon to die of an infection, age 33. Amongst its ruined ziggurats, I saw at last his failings. He had not united all the world, nor built a unity that would survive him. Disillusioned, but determined to complete my odyssey, I followed his corpse to its final resting place in Alexandria. I should note that wherever I walked in Alexander's footsteps, I would take time to pause in my journey to improve my martial arts skills.
Adrian smashes stone planks with his bare fist.
They had served me well as a child, and I knew in my heart that I would have an even greater need for them in the years ahead, though even I could never imagine just how much need.
He balances his entire body on the point of one finger.
During one pale night in Tibet, an acquaintance of mine presented me with a small ball of hashish, and told me I would know when the moment was right to consume it. He could not have spoken more wisely. On my final night in the East, before returning to America, I heard a soft voice whisper my name in the wilderness. Wandering into the desert in pursuit of the sound, I ate the hashish, then proceeded to discard my clothing. The ensuing vision I experienced transformed me forever.
Adrian sees the leaders of ancient Egypt rise from the sands before him, immense and grandiose.
Wading through powdered history, I heard dead kings walking underground, heard fanfares sound through human skulls. Alexander had merely resurrected an age of pharaohs. Their wisdom, truly immortal, now inspired me. And what intellectual magnificence their system inspired! Ptolemy, seeking the universe's pivot from his lighthouse at Pharos. Eratosthenes, measuring the world using only shadows. Their greatest secrets, however, were entrusted to their servants, buried alive with them in sand-flooded chambers. After many months, on the last night of my journey, I returned to the fetid squalor of the same port city, now far more knowledgeable in the ways of the world I intended to conquer. As I walked along dockside, I could literally smell them rising up behind me. The same pack of animals who had thought to accost me upon my arrival on these shores, still wearing the same tattered rags, still reeking of the same desperation. They set upon me like wolves upon a fawn, and I instantly responded in kind. Being no helpless fawn, I unleashed the martial skills I had learned in my months of wandering.
Adrian slams one of the thug's heads into a post, and with the same motion he kicks backward, taking a second off his feet, while with his other arm breaking a third man's elbow over his shoulder.
And in moments they all lay broken and bloodied at my feet. I warned you to not even think about it, I said to them in my now impeccable Turkish. Then I gathered up my duffel bag and walked away toward the waiting freighter, and home. Weeks later, walking the streets of New York once again for the first time in years, I was struck by how similar it smelled to the ports of Turkey. The aroma of different spices, of course, and the all-pervading stench of carbon monoxide fumes, all masking the same sad smell of desperation. Eager to begin my new life, I stopped at a local newsstand and purchased a copy of the Financial News. During my travels, I had managed to amass a small nest egg, and I spent the next few weeks carefully studying the stocks, trying to best decide how to invest the money and make it grow. I became transfixed almost to the point of obliviousness to all other things. And then I met Miranda.
Adrian sits behind a beautiful and well-dressed red-headed woman at the Gunga diner.
Seat across from you available? Actually, I would prefer not to be distracted, miss. Miranda. Miranda St. John. And yours? I am Adrian Veidt. I've watched you in here every day for weeks, scrutinizing the stock pages. What exactly is it you're hunting for? The cornerstone of my fortune. As simply as that? It is, when you understand what you're looking at.
Adrian stands naked before his massive clock-faced window.
More months passed. I invested my money wisely, watched the stocks I had chosen split, then split again. When the stock hit 67, I want you to sell. Yes, all of it. Reinvest the money in electric power stocks. My fortune growing almost as quickly as my attraction to Miranda. I've never seen anything like it. No matter what stocks you choose, you never seem to make a mistake. Mistakes are for the uninformed. I have goals to achieve, dreams to make come true. Well then, let's see what else you can make come in the meantime, shall we?
He turns to Miranda.
Why not, then? I still have more than enough time to conquer the world. You know, when you phrase it like that, I half believe you really mean it. Months later, we watched as work continued on the shining new tower designed to hold both my penthouse apartment and the corporate offices of my burgeoning business. It's magnificent, Adrian. It will serve. From itinerant sailor to corporate mogul in 18 months. Impossible. Not for the person all the financial rags are calling the world's smartest man. Dinner tonight to celebrate?
Can't, unfortunately. I've got a lot to do.
Ah, you've been busy every night for months. I'm starting to forget what you look like.
You can't build an empire by wasting time.
Is that all I am now? A waste of time?
Of course not. Here. Adrian holds up a wad of bills. This should more than cover an evening on the town. Go out and enjoy yourself on me.
Gladly.
Miranda snatches it from him as she storms out.
The building continued, unabated, but the cracks in the ziggurat were already beginning to show. It took me no small amount of time to parse what must have happened next. Apparently, Miranda had found her way to one of the city's poshest underground clubs, talked her way past a brace of bouncers, and walked straight into the heart of darkness. So, who does a girl have to do to get a drink around here?
Miranda is greeted by a suave and stylish man with pointed ears.
Good evening, miss. First time here, I take it? I am Moloch, your host. Please, come sit with me, and we can discuss your options. Gladly. So, exactly what sort of time are you looking for tonight? Frankly, the wilder, the better. I've got a lot of frustrated energy to deal with. Ah, then I'm just the thing.
He grins wickedly as he opens his coat to reveal a pocket lined with syringes.
You name it, I have it. And the first taste is free. Any particular preference? Surprise me. I do not really recall what time I got home that night, though for history's sake I should, since that was the night my life was changed. Forever. Miranda? She was sprawled on our bed, apparently fast asleep. Dead to the world, I thought. Miranda, I'm sorry for tonight. I promise I will find some way to make it up to you. Miranda? Then I turned on the light. only to discover, to my horror, just how right my assumption had been.
Miranda lies naked, curled in the bed, motionless.
Miranda? Dear God! Miranda! What have you done? I rushed to her body, checked for breath, checked for a pulse. There was neither. She was cold. She was gone. And for the first and only time since the deaths of my parents so many years before, I wept for what might have been. Forgive me, Miranda. Please. This was all my fault. Forgive me. When I finally regained my composure minutes later, I reached for the phone to report Miranda's passing, then paused, studying the instrument in my lap almost as if it were an alien object. The last thing my thriving young company needed, I realized, was all the attendant bad publicity that would arise from Miranda's death. No, if this tragedy were to be righted, I reasoned, I would have to do it myself. Isn't that, after all, what Alexander would have done? The newspapers were filled daily with reports of various costumed vigilantes taking the law into their own hands. Characters with fanciful names like Night Owl and the Comedian. Who would notice one more masked man among them, I reasoned. In my trophy room, filled almost to bursting with Alexandrian artifacts I had collected since my return home, was a chest. The chest contained an elaborate costume that I had recently had made for a Halloween party later in the year. The room itself contained everything else I might need to make my new look complete. I wandered the room almost as if I was rummaging some thrift store, adding Alexander's golden gauntlets from here, his glittering headband from there. Until, at last, secreting a few appropriate weapons about my person, I felt ready. Whoever was responsible for supplying poor Miranda with the filthy drugs that had killed her had best beware, I thought. One way or another, justice was coming to find him.
Where once there was only Adrian Veidt, now there stands Ozymandias, ready to face the evils of the world. Chapter 2. The Hand That Mocked Them.
October 11th, 1985. Autobiography continued. As my beloved pet Bubastis and I go through the now almost automatic motions of our daily exercise routine.
At Karnak, Ozymandias leaps through the air with his giant cat.
My thoughts fly back through the years, to the tragic night long before when an accidental drug overdose stole my precious Miranda from me forever. Weeping at her bedside, I determined to hunt down those responsible for her death and make them pay for their crimes. To protect my anonymity and my corporation's swelling fortunes, I donned a colorful costume I'd had made for an upcoming Halloween party and struck out through the dark bowels of my city in search of the welcoming gates of hell.
They land on the massive hand of a statue.
Knowing little about how to locate the true decaying heart of the city's black underbelly, I employed the only legitimate bait I had at my command. Anonymous quantities of cash. Copious amounts of it.
Adrian takes a raw steak from an attendant and throws it to Bubastis.
I spread the green across the city like a cheap tapestry, and waited. The offer was simple. Just tell me what I needed to know, and I would change your life forever.
Who happily chomps it up.
Though not necessarily in the manner you might have expected. To my surprise, it took a full 4 days for me to receive my first response. The anonymous information directed me to a particularly sordid alleyway in the maze of the city's south side, where, rumor had it, much of the local drug trade transpired in the shadows of the shattered street lamps.
A drug dealer operates on the street before a boarded-up window. His latest customer leaves.
Another few months of this kind of weekly take, and I may just start branching out on my own.
I'd think that through again, were I you.
Who? Ozymandias bursts through the boards.
The name would mean nothing to you, nor would it make any difference if it did. For now, just think of me as retribution.
Retribution my shiny black ass, fancy boy.
The dealer pulls a pistol.
The only thing you found yourself here is a filthy, unmarked grave.
I remember his finger tightened on the trigger, and in that eternal fraction of a second, I moved, grabbing his .45 automatic with one hand, expelling the ammo clip from the handle with the press of a thumb, ejecting the single remaining cartridge from the chamber with a rack of the slide, then disassembling what remained of his weapon with a few deft motions, and scattering the now useless pieces at his feet like so much scrap metal. I smiled at him then, casually, which, in retrospect, might have been a mistake. For suddenly there was a vicious switchblade clenched tight in his right fist, angled straight for my carotid.
Keep laughing, Joy Boy. I'm gonna cut you into chum.
Impressive weapon. Would you prefer to wear it or to eat it? With all the skill of a long-time professional, the dealer began to circle me, searching for his easiest opening.
Don't know why you stuck your nose in this. Don't really care. But it's the last mistake you ever gonna make.
Growling, he swung for my throat. I sidestepped, caught his wrist, and bent his arm back to the point of breaking.
Ah!
Admirable effort. He dropped the knife. Ting! Then I reversed my movement and dropped him. It was not a pleasant sound. When the pusher regained consciousness moments later, he found himself upside down, being shaken like a piñata, little crystalline packets of narcotics pouring from his pockets like a swirling winter storm. One question. Where do you get your drugs?
You kidding, right?
Do I appear to be kidding? Who supplies your drugs?
Ozzy drops him on his head.
I can't, man. I tell you anything, you'll have me killed just to make a point.
He puts the dealer in a chokehold.
You don't tell me what I want to know, and you'll just wish you were dead. And since I'm already here, and your boss still has to find you, this doesn't strike me as a terribly difficult decision to make. After perhaps 5 seconds hesitation, the hapless pusher began to speak, and speak quickly. When he was finally finished telling me all I needed to know, I left him covered in his foul product, and bound to a street lamp with my own signature Gordian knot. The following evening, acting on the information I'd extracted, I pulled my sleek sports car to an easy stop outside the city's most exclusive supper club. The doorman, obviously having recognized me from any number of news photos, almost broke his own leg stumbling to open my door for me.
Good evening, Mr. Veidt.
I'd like a quiet, inconspicuous table in the corner, if you have one.
Absolutely, sir. Please, follow me.
And your drink, sir? I presume you have a well-aired Chateau Lafite Rothschild, say 1818, available? Oh, of course. Then that will more than suffice.
Adrian sits and enjoys his drink, watching the comings and goings of the patrons. When he sees an obvious delivery of money being made, he follows the bagman in his car, keeping a safe distance until he arrives at his boss's warehouse lair. Although it was Moloch who actually sold Miranda the drugs that killed her, his operation is now in the hands of a local gangster.
Boss in?
When is he ever elsewhere? You'd think he was trying to save on rent or something. Better just walk easy around him tonight, though. He's in a particularly shitty mood.
Thanks for the warning. As the thug slipped inside, I opened the small suitcase I'd kept hidden in the trunk of my car, and prepared to take a giant step into a brave new world. Now in costume, I slipped up to the building and scanned the interior through a gap in a poorly boarded window. The place looked exactly as I'd imagined it would. An armed guard prowled the rafters, keeping a sharp eye on the room below. Young Asian women wearing only their underwear and face masks to ensure they couldn't abscond with any of the narcotics they processed stayed focused on their work. And, of course, in the center of it all, a grotesquely fat man in a pristine suit sat like a squat toad, overseeing his squalid kingdom.
Evening go well, Hondo. Couldn't have gone better, Mr. Porcini. Here, weighs twice as much as last week.
Well, damn. Maybe it's about time we jacked up to go and...
What the hell?
Ozymandias has hurled the door guard through the door and into the drug den.
Does this belong to you? You really shouldn't leave your garbage lying in the middle of the street where just anyone can trip over it.
Please, don't hit me again. Don't hurt me.
Who the hell is that?
Who cares? Just kill the fucker and be done with it.
As Porcini's men started to move, I warned the women in their native tongue to seek cover. Then I surveyed the entire room, as time slowed to a crawl for me, then literally stopped. In a moment that felt more like a millennium, I took in everything around me, calculated all the possibilities, all the conceivable outcomes, and, when all likely coincidence had been removed from the equation, last opportunity to surrender while you can still walk, Porcini.
Odds are stacked against you, pretty boy.
I made my move. If that's the way you want it, Porcini, just remember, you were warned.
Ozymandias removes his headband.
Well, what are you morons waiting for? Shoot!
Snapped into action by their master's voice, Porcini's men moved as one, but I was already 7 steps ahead of them. They fired where I no longer was. They swung where I'd already been. They gave it their best, which was nowhere good enough, while I glided through the warehouse, hurling my ricocheting headband with pinpoint accuracy, leaving a trail of unconscious bodies in my wake.
He leaps atop the table and flips over a guard, dodging gunfire, pausing to throw his headband forward. He jumps up to a large light, catches his headband, then jumps to the rafters.
Ha! As the remaining thugs gathered under me, struggling to find a clear shot, I carefully knocked over the gunman on the rafters, making certain to angle his fall so that he landed directly in the center of the huge pile of cocaine beneath him. The impact created a blinding storm of poisonous white powder that made it impossible to see, let alone breathe. While Porcini's crew struggled for air, I moved quickly through the dense ivory cloud.
Ozymandias knocks out the rest of the guards with perfectly placed punches and kicks,
taking out the last of his men with considerably little effort. Since, thanks to my decades of martial arts training, I didn't need to breathe while I worked.
Their boss aims a gun at the hero.
Okay, asshole. Freeze! Twitch one single muscle, and you're toast.
Ah, so there you are, Mr. Porcini. Well played. Any particular reason you haven't already put a bullet through my brain? That would be the logical thing to do.
Fuck logic, asshole. I ain't putting you down till I know who the hell you... Oh? What's that creaking sound?
That, Mr. Porcini, would be the sound of your Klieg lights collapsing, caused by my ricocheting headband. Directly on you. And, as for who I am, you ill-dressed sack of suet, you can consider me the smartest man in the world, asshole. At which point, with typical timing, the local police, having been drawn by the sound of all that gunfire, finally arrived on the scene, just in time to clean up the rather unpleasant mess I had made.
Okay, everybody, freeze! You know, most of these other mooks I recognize. But you, fancy boy, who the hell are you?
And that was the moment it came to me, as a lifetime of inspiration and admiration suddenly echoed in the immortal words of Percy Bysshe Shelley. My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. And now, if you gentlemen will kindly excuse me, you have a great deal of garbage to clean up, while I still have worlds to conquer. So, until we meet again.
Hey, where the hell do you think you're going?
Get your ass back here before we...
Ozymandias backflips out of sight.
Gone? But that's not possible. Nobody could possibly move that fast. Apparently he can. Just great. So now we got another masked maniac to deal with. This town just keeps getting more twisted by the day.
Adrian drives home.
By this time I was a good half-mile away, enjoying my victory, and pondering all my potential futures. In the weeks that followed, as I thought it through, it quickly became clear to me that my city had a desperate need for my unique skill set. So I took to my newfound role as a masked adventurer with a vengeance. I tracked down and demolished the mobile gambling den of the high-rolling wheeler-dealer.
Ozzy trashes a gaming table.
I put the skids to the gang of the stolen car czar who called himself LowJack.
He leaps down onto the hood of a drag racer.
And put my foot down on the international counterfeiting ring run by the overly ambitious $3 bill.
He kicks a man in the head as bills fly around them.
Overall, it was more fun than human beings should be allowed to have. Every morning I would sit over my breakfast, scouring the local newspapers for any mention of my masked alter ego. And there were plenty. I found myself facing foes on land, air, and sea, and outsmarting them all.
He hoists the villain bound with a fishing line.
Ha! Grr.
A clipped headline reads, Ozymandias reels in ancient mariner.
The scrapbooks I maintained of my exploits were starting to fill an entire bookcase, though Providence still worked to remind me that I wasn't the only player involved in this dangerous game.
Another clipping reads, Night Owl captures King of Skin.
Still, there seemed to be a whole lot fewer costumed adventurers than in my youth, and I quickly came to realize it might be to my advantage to find out what happened to so many of them over the years, if only to avoid suffering a similar fate. I spent much of the next several weeks in the bowels of the New York Public Library, swiftly scouring reams of microfiche, copies of newspapers from the last few decades, looking for articles about those who'd come before me. In the beginning, finding them was relatively easy. In 1939, the Minutemen had exploded on the scene like a nova, lighting the night in the name of justice.
Headlines sweep over the screen, reading, Here come the Minutemen.
Then, as the years passed, the articles started to take on a tragically different tone.
Silhouette found murdered. Dollar bill shot dead foiling robbery. Minutemen disband. Hooded justice disappears.
In less than a decade, their star had burned out completely, leaving only one true mystery remaining. What had happened to hooded justice? Since childhood, I'd felt compelled to solve any mystery that chanced to confront me, and in that pursuit, I had yet to fail. So I devoted what little spare time I had to mapping hooded justice's winding path throughout the city during his final days. A path that ultimately led me unerringly to the waterfront once more. It seemed as good a place as any to start my manhunt. New York City's Port District was much the same as any other, reeking of diesel and men's sweat, and that indescribable stench that speaks of last chances and lost opportunities. I'd smelled it before in Turkey. I was certain I'd smell it again before I died. Those who walked among these shadows had nowhere else to go.
Perfect. There goes my last friggin' match.
Ozymandias appears in a darkened alley.
There are other ways to light the darkness, Skeeter.
Not for me, boss. Been a while.
I am hunting for hooded justice.
You and everybody else with a death wish. Word is that Uncle Sam's got one of his spooks checking on HJ's disappearance even as we speak.
Thank you, Skeeter. I will keep that in mind.
No sweat, boss. Just stay.
He vanishes into the darkness, as silent as he arrived.
Huh. Couldn't even spare a dry buck of matches.
I covered the dock area like a wet blanket, but in the end, all I found was dried blood. Been here so long, there's no way to tell if it belongs to hooded justice or some unfortunate flounder. I'll have to... Something behind me!
Ozzy backflipped as bullets splatter a few seagulls.
By the time the machine gun spray kicked up sparks and splinters, I was already in motion and yards away, using whatever quickly came to hand as a counterweapon.
He grabs a trash can lid while in the air.
And knowing I'd only had one opportunity to make my actions count,
he throws it at the gun, knocking it out of its owner's hands.
Enough, friend! I am not your enemy!
Yeah, right. You're the fucking Easter Bunny. Well, unless you got a half-dozen more trash can lids hidden on you, looks to me like I got you outmatched. I mean, come on. You didn't really think the comedian would go out hunting with only one gun, did you? Sorry, pretty boy, but I guess the joke's on you.
Chapter 3. The Heart That Fed.
Autobiography continued. September 23rd, 1959.
Ozymandias faces his opponent.
He called himself the comedian in the most ironic way possible. As a teenager, back in the 40s, he had been one of the costumed adventurers called the Minutemen. Now he worked as a freelance agent for the U.S. government, doing whatever unpleasant wet work was required of him. Our paths crossed for the first time on the city's waterfront, as we both sought answers to the disappearance years before of the masked avenger called Hooded Justice. And now he was trying his utmost to kill me for my pains.
Looks like the joke's on you, pansy boy. And the punchline's a killer.
Just out of curiosity, is there any particular reason you intend to murder someone you've only just met? After all, we are both theoretically on the same side of the law.
Ain't seen any proof of that. So I figure shoot first, ask questions afterward.
As we talked, I kept my eyes focused on his trigger finger, and loosed a slender stiletto from its hidden sheath in my gauntlet. Seems a rather extreme solution, doesn't it? When I observed the almost imperceptible tightening of his finger, I acted in self-defense.
With a sweep of his arm, Ozymandias hurls the golden spike.
Enough! No one catches me off guard twice! The stiletto flew with unerring accuracy, sliding into the barrel of the comedian's weapon as if it belonged there, completely blocking the opening, so that when he finished pulling the trigger,
the comedian's gun explodes in his hand.
As the explosion momentarily blinded the comedian, I made my move, hurling myself at the powerful figure, the impact taking us both off our feet. For a moment, I managed to get my arm around his throat and applied debilitating pressure to his carotid artery.
Let go!
But only for a moment.
Eddie elbows Ozzy away.
I said let go, you stinking!
And gets on top of him.
You miserable mother! You're gonna pay for that! Get off me! Yeah, sure. But first you better look around, glory boy. Enjoy the last sight you're ever gonna see.
You wouldn't.
Don't bet on it.
Eddie brings his lit cigar closer to Adrian's face.
As the smoldering red tip of his cheap cigar bore straight for my eye, I did the only thing I could do under the circumstances.
Ozzy bites off the end of the cigar.
Huh? What are you, crazy?
For an instant, I could not reply. Then,
he spits it back at Eddie.
That, sir, is the one thing I most assuredly am not. Now kindly do me an indescribable courtesy and get the hell off me! Your breath reeks of whiskey and rancid cigars.
Adrian flips the comedian off of him with his knee.
Hey!
As one, almost mirror images, we flipped to our feet, then turned again as one to face each other in final combat. You made this a confrontation when it had no need to be. Now you will face the consequences of those actions.
Yeah. Blow me, showgirl.
You're nothing but a common thug,
says the queer in the skirt. Come on, let's do this.
Even as he spoke, the government assassin struck, his potentially fatal blow barely blocked by my swift martial arts move. Instantly, I attempted to return the blow, which he in turn blocked with equal ease.
Ozymandias tries a jump kick, only to be blocked by the comedian's leg.
As the battle progressed, it quickly became obvious that we were absolutely evenly matched. We could continue this travesty until both of us were too battered and broken to move any longer. Or one of us could choose to do what the comedian did, which was to cheat.
Eddie looks over Ozzy's shoulder.
No, don't!
And he turns.
Eh?
Eddie sucker punches him.
Moron! Never let yourself get distracted during a fight. It can be the death of you. Here, let me show you what I mean.
The comedian picks up the gun hit by the trash can lid.
Well, what do you know? You managed to bust up both my weapons. Looks like you saved your ass this time, pretty boy. But if I were you, I'd wad up my pantyhose and throw 'em away. This is a game for grown-ups.
If a man has the opportunity to do good, he's obliged to take it.
Yeah, you just keep telling yourself that, kid.
And with that, the comedian was gone, lost among the shadows. I sincerely doubt it ever once occurred to him that I had allowed him to defeat me, just so I could gather as much data as possible about exactly how he fought and operated. Then I, too, walked off into the night, wondering precisely what sort of government would employ someone like the comedian in the first place. Months passed. My momentary fascination with the disappearance of hooded justice quickly gave way to more immediate concerns. There were rumors of something new in the world, something more than human, something that threatened the status quo in ways we could barely imagine.
Mr. Veidt? Good morning, sir. You, really need to see this morning's papers.
Ah, then they've finally gone public. Here, let me take a look.
Then you knew about this, sir?
There is very little I do not know about Marla. The headline reads, "Meet Dr. Manhattan. There is a Superman, and he's an American." There it was, on the front page of every paper, the ultimate game changer. Omnipotence in human form, a down-home deity. We could only thank God that he was on our side. At least, so far. I spent the next few minutes catching up on what little I hadn't already learned about this so-called Superman. Unfortunately, in the end, it wasn't much.
Impossible. I've never seen anyone read so much so quick. Wait, excuse me. I forgot who I was talking to.
Already forgiven. How much liquid finance do we have available at the moment?
About enough to purchase several small countries. Why?
Splendid, because it just might come to that. But first, I want you to put every available dollar into fallout shelters and the renting and construction of same. I'd like to corner the market, if possible.
Fallout? You mean the atomic kind?
What other kind is there?
Sir, you're scaring me.
It just never hurts to be cautious, is all. And Marla, find me the 3 best architects in the world. Make sure that one of them is a cold weather specialist. 3 months later. Work well done, gentlemen, considering the time limit. All 3 of your plans have merit. Now all we have to do is find a way to combine the best of each into one focused design.
Just tell us what you need, Mr. Veidt, and we'll make it happen.
Excellent. Just remember, above all else, time is of the essence. Thus, 2 months later still, Adrian and Marla oversee the beginnings of a construction in Antarctica.
It's absolutely amazing. 2 months ago, this area was a desolate wasteland. And now?
When the future comes, Marla, it's best if it comes running. For now, we'd best leave these men to their work. I've still got business. Back in New York. While I manipulated the stock market by day, at night I returned to my role as a masked vigilante, taking down a gang of ruthless smugglers who called themselves the Contraband.
Ozymandias tosses one thug into another with a sweep of his leg.
I left my prey dangling outside police HQ, bound in my now trademarked Gordian knot, and was making my way back to my car, when I heard a voice behind me calling my name. Softly at first, then with more urgency.
"Hey, Mr. O!" A policeman approaches him with a piece of paper.
Yes? May I help you?
"This was left for you at HQ.
What is it?
An invitation to participate in next week's big Red Cross charity event for Indian famine. Looks like anybody who's anybody's gonna be there."
Unfortunately, I'm afraid I will be otherwise occupied that night.
"Too bad. That means you're gonna miss meeting Captain Metropolis, Night Owl, Dr. Manhattan."
Dr. Manhattan will be there?
So say all the ads.
Well then, perhaps I should do my civic duty after all. Tell them I accept.
Happily.
Madison Square Garden, June 1960. The banner on stage reads, "Help feed the hungry in India," as Adrian balances his body on one finger on a stack of red, white, and blue rubber balls. True to their word, every mask in the city made an appearance that night, and I soon found myself performing with the most unexpected of partners.
And as the amazing Ozymandias demonstrates his uncanny sense of balance, keep your eyes on the colorful balls beneath him. As, one by one, they are literally shot out from under him by the unerring marksmanship of the one and only comedian. Let's hear it for them, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah! Ooh. Of all people, what in God's name are you doing here?
I go where the suits send me.
Afterwards, backstage, the two talk in private.
Gotta give you credit, fancy boy. I figured you were long dead by now. But according to cliche, you got balls.
How so?
If I'd missed even once, there'd be pieces of you splattered all over that stage.
Actually, I wasn't the least bit concerned. From everything I've studied about you, you never miss.
Shouldn't be so cocksure of yourself, sister. There's always a first time.
And a last.
Adrian leaves Eddie and approaches Byron Lewis, better known as Mothman.
I can do this. I can do this. I can do this. I will not die. I can do this.
Excuse me a moment. Of course you can do this, my friend. I've absolutely no doubt of it.
But what?
When I first put on this costume, it was because I was inspired by people like you. And you've never let me down yet. Now go out there and do what you've always done, my friend. Make us proud.
Thanks. I needed that. I can do it. I can.
I stood backstage in the control booth watching Mothman's performance. He faltered a time or two, but he did not fall. The soaring man still controlled the skies. Meanwhile, I thought such a bank of monitors could prove useful in my new Antarctic citadel. I would have to act on that as soon as possible. Later, at the reception,
That was very kind, son, what you did for Mothman back there.
Thank you, but no. It was necessary. The last thing the public's confidence in us needs is to watch one of us come apart in front of them.
Guess that's why they call you the smartest man in the world. Speaking of which, mind if I ask you a question?
Not at all, Captain. Ask away, and I'll do what I can to answer.
Okay, then. So is it pronounced Ozymandias or Ozymandias? I've always wanted to know. Something wrong?
No, not at all. In point of fact, both are acceptable, though I've always preferred Ozymandias. It sounds more elegant somehow.
Thanks, kid. That's been driving me crazy for years. Now, if you'll excuse me, I really ought to go mingle. Go, enjoy your evening.
Neanderthal, I thought. Here he has an opportunity to ask one question of the world's smartest man. And this is what he chooses to ask? What sort of primitives was I dealing with it? Before I could even finish the thought, I noticed a bright blue glow in one corner of the room, and realized that Dr. Manhattan had arrived, and was embroiled in conversation with the one called Night Owl.
You don't age, do you?
This is my perception of myself. My perception does not change, hence my appearance does not change or age.
Well, that must be handy.
I came up to him, introduced myself, though it seemed I didn't need to, then shook his azure hand and moved on. Then, when he was otherwise occupied, I slipped out of Manhattan's field of vision and eavesdropped as he resumed his conversation with Night Owl.
Sometimes, well, tonight, I think maybe I should just walk away.
What would you do instead?
Fix cars. Can you imagine that?
At that moment I chanced to glance down, and noticed all the fine hairs on the back of my arm were standing straight up, and pointing directly at Manhattan. When I moved my arm, the hair moved as well, continuing to point at Manhattan. That was more than symbolic, I thought. It was something almost ominous. At which point Janie Slater, whom the media described as Dr. Manhattan's constant companion, strolled over, and the evening took on a totally different tone.
Good evening, gentlemen. Wonderful show earlier.
Janie Slater, permit me to introduce Night Owl, one of the first of the masked adventurers.
My undying pleasure, Miss Slater.
And mine, sir. John, would you mind terribly if we went home? I'm getting that queasy feeling in my stomach again.
I, of course, no longer get ill. But if you're feeling incapacitated, Janie, certainly we can go. Night Owl, it was an honor to see you again, sir. I hope our paths will cross again soon.
Who knows, Doc? You can never tell.
Well, actually, I can.
John, stop showing off. It was nice to meet you, Night Owl. Have a lovely night.
And you as well, Mr. Ozymandias. Do enjoy the rest of your evening. I shall see you again soon. And in a blue flash, they were gone, leaving me even more unnerved than before. All the time I'd been hiding, he had known I was there. Just what sort of creature was this Dr. Manhattan, anyway? Several months later, my Antarctic hideaway was finally finished, and my associate Martha and I flew south to inspect it.
It's magnificent, Mr. Veidt. Like something straight out of mythology.
Style, as you may someday discover, my dear, is everything.
Adrian's helicopter lands at Karnak.
Security is state-of-the-art. No one can approach from miles in any direction, by any means, without being detected.
He is greeted by 3 attendants.
Welcome home, Veidt-sama. Your presence honors us.
Our humble condolences on the terrible plane accident that took the lives of the 3 most honorable architects who designed this humble building. It shall stand as a lasting monument to their genius and their memory. Marla, I shall meet you in the bedroom shortly. There is something I must first attend to.
Well, don't keep me waiting too long. It was an exhausting trip.
Then I'll try not to wake you.
The attendants present his costume pieces on 3 platters.
As I walked for the first time through the magnificent corridors of what would soon come to be my true home, I shed all of me that had been Adrian Veidt, and donned the wardrobe of him who was quickly becoming my true self, the modern conqueror of worlds.
He changes to Ozymandias.
And moments later, in my recently added monitoring room. Is it ready?
Just as you asked, Master. The system is now linked to every broadcasting network on Earth, completely at your verbal command. You can see whatever you wish to see, merely by calling for it.
Let us see if that is true. Show me Dr. Manhattan.
The wall of monitors springs to life, and images of Dr. Manhattan fill Ozymandias' view.
And so it begins.
Chapter 4. Shattered Visage.
Autobiography continued, December 29th, 1960. Over the next several months I continued crime fighting almost more as an afterthought than anything else. I had quickly come to realize that I lacked Rorschach's pure, obsessive passion for the job, or the comedian's sadistic joy in the act. I had neither Night Owl's deep sense of responsibility, nor Dr. Manhattan's overriding sense of duty. To me, it became more a case of possessing the necessary skills for the job, so it seemed a shame to waste them. Plus, it helped to occupy my evenings.
Ozymandias grabs a man in a wingsuit while kicking 2 others out of their glides.
So you call yourselves the Flying Tigers, eh? An insufferable insult to one of the bravest, most noble groups of fighting men who ever lived. What made the Flying Tigers comparatively special was the flexible fabric that stretched from wrist to ankle on their costumes, allowing them to glide for short distances on the local updrafts.
He throws the man into a pole as the others fall to the ground. He lands and addresses 2 others.
You want me? Come get me. I loosed the twin stilettos hidden in my gauntlets, and proceeded to remove that particular advantage as the 2 remaining tigers came at me.
No, don't! You'll...
He rips through their wings.
The 2 men hit the asphalt with a lot more force than I'd expected. They wouldn't be stealing anything more for quite some time. I left the gang dangling outside the local precinct HQ, bound on my own signature Gordian knot, and slipped back into the night. January 20th, 1961. One advantage to becoming one of the world's richest men is the sort of events to which one is often invited. Take President John F. Kennedy's inauguration, for example.
The world is very different now. For man holds in his mortal hands the power to abolish all forms of human poverty,
and all forms of human life. After. Thank you for coming, Mr. Veidt. I'd also like to thank you for all your help and support during what was truly a difficult campaign.
It was my sincere pleasure, Mr. President. If there's ever anything else I can do to help, please don't hesitate to ask.
Much appreciated. Adrian Veidt, I'd like you to meet my wife, Jacqueline.
Jack has mentioned you often, Mr. Veidt. Glad to finally meet you. As I walked away, an oddly familiar face moved up to shake the new president's hand.
Looking good, Jack. The presidency suits you.
Thanks, Eddie. Coming from you.
And a cold chill suddenly rippled up my spine. Several weeks later, at Karnak, my Antarctic fortress, I continued my investigation into the secrets of the enigmatic Dr. Manhattan. Show me all new recorded footage. And instantly, the entire monitor bank lit up as if it were the heart of Christmas.
Must warn you that the following recently obtained security camera footage of Dr. Manhattan may be disturbing to watch, as the world's most powerful figure took down a vice den run by the master criminal Moloch.
Back off, blue boy, or I'll...
Dr. Manhattan raises his hand at the gunman. A test pattern is shown on the newscast, reading, "Image too graphic to televise,"
reducing Moloch's henchman's head to atoms in the process.
Clearly, the good doctor had little concern for the sanctity of human life, and that concerned me greatly. May 19th, 1962. To celebrate the President's 45th birthday, I attended a $1,000-a-plate dinner at New York's famous Madison Square Garden, thrown by radio and television star Jack Benny. Adrian witnesses Marilyn Monroe's famous birthday song and is introduced to her at the party. He quickly deduces the ins and outs of the Kennedys, though he decides it's none of his business. 1 week later, our world changed yet again.
Honey, come in here, quick! You gotta see this!
What's the emergency, Jerry? I'm washing dishes here.
On TV, it's Night Owl. Says he got an announcement to make.
After a great deal of consideration, I believe the time has come to do what I probably should have done several years ago. It's time to take off the mask and retire.
Night Owl removes his mask.
My name is Hollis Mason, and for the past several decades, it has been my honor to serve you, both as Night Owl and as a member of your local police force. If you need me in the future, you'll find me at Mason's Auto Repair, my new shop downtown. I hope to see you there.
Honey, I'm gonna get the old Chevy out of the garage. I know just where we can get it fixed.
Not long after, Hollis Mason published his autobiography, Under the Hood. It did not cast the heroic community in a particularly positive light. For a moment, I wondered precisely what sort of axe Mason had to grind with his compatriots. Then I turned my attention to more immediate matters. Marilyn Monroe, death. Most current video, please. I studied the videos carefully, seeking more information than had been released to the public. The Los Angeles coroner had listed Monroe's death as a probable suicide from an overdose of barbiturates. But astute observation told me what it really was. It was somebody tidying up loose ends. As we'll see in the Comedian series, Adrian is right. October 14th, 1962. A U.S. U-2 spy plane flying over communist Cuba captured photos of Soviet ballistic missile bases under construction. October 21st. After much deliberation, President Kennedy responded in the only way he believed possible.
And thus I have instituted an immediate military blockade, quarantining Cuba, and preventing any further missiles from being delivered there. We urge the Soviet government to quickly remove their missiles from Cuba to prevent any further actions on our part.
October 23rd. Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev took to the airwaves in response to the president's actions.
What the Americans have done constitutes a serious threat to peace and the securities of peoples.
Somewhere, I knew, there were scientists adjusting the hands of the doomsday clock.
Mr. Veidt?
Yes, Marla?
There are two, gentlemen here to see you.
Show them in. I've been expecting them.
Sir, we would appreciate your getting in touch with a costumed crime fighter called Ozymandias as quickly as possible.
The president wishes to see him immediately.
I had wondered how long that would take.
Tell Mr. Kennedy I'll do what I can." 3 hours later, in the Oval Office of the White House. "You summoned me, Mr. President?" "Ha! Should have known my security wouldn't pose a problem for you, Adrian." "And I should know how difficult it would be to conceal my true identity from the President of the United States." "Only because I know you so well, my friend. Trust me, your secret is safe with me. Now, please, sit down." "As you wish, sir." "I assume you already know why I asked you to come." "I have my suppositions, sir." "Frankly, I could use the advice of the world's smartest man." "It is yours for the asking. Describe the problem." "Simply put, we stand on the brink of nuclear war, and I am seriously considering sending Dr. Manhattan to Cuba to put an end to the problem. The question is, should I?" "I cannot tell you how glad I am you asked me first, Mr. President. My recommendation is that you hold fast. The Soviets will back down. Once Dr. Manhattan is used for something like this, there's no turning back. The rest of the world will live in terror of us from that day forth, and that can come to no good end. If you'd like, sir, I will go to the problem area myself and see if there is anything I can do to help." "I would appreciate that, my friend. I'll hold Dr. Manhattan back as a last resort." "Believe me, Mr. President, that is a very wise choice." President Kennedy shakes Adrian's hand. "In the end, at my suggestion, the Soviets agreed to remove their missiles from Cuba, in exchange for the United States removing its own Jupiter missiles from Turkey." Adrian speaks to Kennedy on the phone. "No, seriously, Mr. President, if I was any help whatsoever, it was my honor." "Still, my friend, this nation owes you a debt it can never repay. Your advice may well have saved us all." "The logic was simple, sir. Dr. Manhattan is simply too powerful a weapon to ever release, under any circumstances." "Well, let's hope this administration has seen its last crisis, Adrian. You take care now, hear?" "You too, Mr. President. Be well." November 22nd, 1963. 13 months after the Cuban Missile Crisis, President Kennedy was in a motorcade passing through Dealey Plaza in Dallas, Texas, when several rifle shots suddenly rang out, and the president snapped forward in his seat, mortally wounded. In response, his wife Jacqueline and his Secret Service contingent threw themselves over Kennedy's bloody body in a belated effort to protect him, while, several hundred feet away on the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository, according to the evidence, one Lee Harvey Oswald laid down the Carcano rifle he had allegedly used to shoot the president, and walked down to the Texas Theater where he would be arrested approximately 70 minutes later. 2 days after, while Oswald was being transferred to the Dallas County Jail, he was shot dead by local nightclub owner Jack Ruby, live on national television. All this is a matter of public record. The headline reads, "President Assassinated." What is not on the record is how, the day after the president's death, I was locked away at Karnak, studying all the recorded footage of the event, searching for even the slightest hint that things weren't what they appeared to be, and, to my everlasting regret, finding nothing. In the end, I reluctantly came to realize not even the world's smartest man is able to predict everything. A further note of context, that while in the Watchmen movie the comedian is shown to be Kennedy's assassin, the writer of his own series, Brian Azzarello, could not disagree more with that assessment of his character, and his series shows Jack and Eddie to be close friends and allies. However, as a further note, the writer of Dr. Manhattan's series, J. Michael Straczynski, shows Eddie being the gunman in one possible alternate history that John sees after he accidentally splinters the timeline into endless potential realities. So if he was given the order, who knows what he'd do? Maybe Eddie's version of events is simply what he chooses to remember due to the tragedy which did occur. It's up to you which writer's interpretation you prefer of this historical event. Now, back to the story. The following spring, during a citywide blackout, Hollis Mason's protege made his public debut in dramatic fashion. Night Owl descends from his owl ship to control a crowd of rioters, single-handedly taking on an army of looters and would-be rapists. Archimedes! Cloud! Smoke billows out from the ship. Grappling gun should wrap things up nicely. The thugs are soon wrapped up in wire. Suddenly, there was a second generation of masked adventurers on the scene. Some of them far stranger than even the oddest of the Minutemen had been. Take Rorschach, if you would.
Beat a hike, freak face, or we're gonna hurt you.
Believe me, punks, you don't want to do this.
The odds were 6-1, clearly in Rorschach's favor. Rorschach flips a man upside down while kicking another in the chest. When the battle was over, the damage included 14 missing teeth, 5 broken ribs, 4 dislocated limbs, and 3 major concussions. Rorschach had made his point the hard way. The team of Night Owl and Rorschach can be seen in Night Owl's book. Early in 1965, on the West Coast, Sally Jupiter's daughter went public as the second Silk Spectre. Within a few months, she had moved to New York. Laurie flips over a car to kick an armed thug, who drops his gun.
Hiya!
Laurie's series shows her origin and her debut. In April of 1966, while I was still pursuing the criminal element as Ozymandias. Hey, Mr. O! Another policeman approaches Ozymandias, this time with an envelope. What is it this time, officer? Captain Metropolis left this here for you. Captain Metropolis? I haven't heard from him in years. I wonder what he wants now. Arguably a long shot, but well worth exploring. So what was in the envelope? Maybe, just maybe, officer, a new hope for the future. Metropolis's note directed me to meet him in a well-appointed townhouse on the city's east side. When I arrived, I found I was not the only costumed adventurer he had invited. Adrian joins Janie Slater beside Dr. Manhattan, as well as Silk Spectre, the comedian, Rorschach, and Night Owl. Well, firstly, let me say I'm pleased to see so many of you here. Very pleased. Secondly, for those who only know me as Captain Metropolis, the name's Nelson Gardner. Call me Nelson. Third, I guess I should welcome everybody to the first ever meeting of the Crime Busters. Why the Crime Busters? Well, as you know, this country hasn't had an organization of masked adventurers since the Minutemen disbanded in '49. Specialized law enforcement is standing still. Crime isn't. New social evils emerge every day. Promiscuity, drugs, campus subversion, you name it. Now, by banding together as the Crime Busters, we...
Bullshit.
What?
I said bullshit. This whole idea, this Crime Buster shtick, it stinks. What it is, Nellie, is that you're getting old. You want to go on playing cowboys and Indians.
That isn't true.
Listen, let's not throw the idea out right away. Me and Rorschach have made headway into the gang problem by pooling our efforts.
Obviously, I agree. But a group this size seems more like a publicity exercise somehow. It's too big and unwieldy.
Surely that's just an organizational problem. With the right person coordinating the group, I think.
Oh, and I wonder who that would be. Got any ideas, Ozzy? I mean, you are the smartest guy in the world, right?
It doesn't require genius to see that America has problems that need tackling.
Damn straight. And it takes a moron to think they're small enough for clowns like you guys to handle. What's going down in this world? You got no idea. Believe me.
I think I'm as well informed as anyone. Given correct handling, none of the world's problems are insurmountable. All it takes is a little intelligence.
Which you got in spades, right? You people are a joke. You hear Moloch's back in town, you think, oh boy, let's gang up and bust him. You think that matters? You think that solves anything?
Well, of course it matters if...
It don't matter squat. Here, let me show you why it don't matter.
Hey, what are you doing? Eddie sets Nelson's map on fire.
It don't matter squat, because inside 30 years, the nukes are gonna be flying like Maybugs.
My display.
And then Ozzy here is gonna be the smartest man on the cinder. Now pardon me, but I got an appointment. See you in the funny papers.
Listen, Nelson, this isn't working out. Maybe...
John, I think I'd like to go home now, please.
Please, don't all leave. Somebody has to do it, don't you see? Somebody has to save the world.
And that was the moment I realized that somebody had to be me. Chapter 5. These Lifeless Things. Ozymandias reads amid stacks of books as a variety of films play on his monitors.
Audio autobiography continued. Permit me to let you in on a little secret. Being the world's smartest man does not, by extension, automatically make you the most creative. In the months after the aborted Crime Busters meeting at Nelson Gardner's home, where it had occurred to me that saving the world from mutually assured nuclear destruction was going to have to be my responsibility, I had put my mind to finding a viable solution, and had, quite frankly, come up with absolutely nothing. So I turned to the works of the greatest fantasists of our time in search of inspiration. Over the next several months I strove to read every science fiction novel ever published and watched every SF film and television show of which I could procure a copy. Whenever I had a spare minute, I would speed read through some of the many volumes I'd collected, searching for that certain spark that would inspire my master plan. But ultimately, coming up with nothing.
He throws the book he's reading over his shoulder.
Rather than a solution, all I was finding was a continuing source of frustration. There had to be an answer.
The book lands perfectly on top of one of the stacks.
And it was somewhere among those mountains of hardbacks, or in one of the TV shows and films that I watched over and over. Damn it, it had to be in there somewhere. Having finally finished reading every book in the collection, I began again. In this particular endeavor, I was nothing if not obsessively persistent. The fate of the world, after all, quite literally hung in the balance. I was re-watching the entire run of a relatively short-lived TV series called The Outer Limits when I finally found it. It was the story of a group of American scientists who used their rather considerable skills to transform one of their own into a grotesque alien, designed to frighten humanity into banding together to combat the perceived impending threat of alien invasion. In the end, unfortunately, their plan failed, but not for want of trying. The title of the program was The Architects of Fear. I honestly cannot begin to tell you how long I sat there, watching the episode over and over and over. Certainly hours, possibly days, looking for why their scheme had failed, taking in every little nuance. It became an obsession. I actually found myself repeating dialogue from the episode in my sleep. Still, I kept watching, for the answer I knew must be there. And then, at last, I found it. Video off. All things considered, the solution was surprisingly simple. The scientists on that TV show simply hadn't thought big enough. And that was something with which I had no problem. No problem at all. First thing the following morning, I started to put my plan into motion. Marla, I want one of my facilities retrofitted as a state-of-the-art biolab, and I need it done yesterday. It wasn't quite yesterday, but soon enough, I had my lab, and I immediately set to work developing an appropriate alien to suit my plan. I started by splicing together what seemed to be promising strands of DNA to see what might develop. The more hideous, I decided, the better. What I got, however, bore little resemblance to what I had intended.
Adrian's genetic experiment has produced a kitten.
Marla, could you please have this lab reset as quickly as possible? Oh, and while you're at it, I think I need you to pick me up a very large supply of kitty litter. I named the hybrid lynx Bubastis for the ancient Egyptian city that was the center of worship for the cat goddess Bast. Clearly, I am not knowledgeable enough to do what needs to be done by myself. But part of being the smartest man in the world is knowing what you do not know, yet knowing how to find someone who does.
He pets the small cat on his shoulder as he summons Marla and orders her to buy him a small private island.
The British Museum, 26 hours later.
Ozymandias addresses a pile of beaten thieves.
I'll give you credit for having decided that, if you're going to steal antiquities, the British Museum would be the perfect place to do so. Too bad you forgot one thing. You forgot to check the papers to see if I might be visiting. That was far too easy. Isn't there anyone who can give me a real challenge these days?
Dr. Manhattan appears.
Hello, Adrian. You should have joined in the fun. there was no point. You were winning. You had won. You have always won this fight. We need to talk, but not here. I require privacy. And, just like that, we were elsewhere. Much was discussed that day, involving quantum singularities and infinite ends of the world. But now is not the moment to recount the conversation. Trust me, the substance of it will become all too clear before we're done. The conversation just alluded to can be witnessed in Dr. Manhattan's series, and only there is its full importance truly made clear. Several months later, after considerable effort on Marla's part, we stood on the sandy shore of my latest acquisition, a secluded tropical island far from the normal shipping lanes. Adrian commends Marla on a job well done, and commands the building of several structures, and the island's erasure from as many public records as can be accomplished.
You do realize that to accomplish all this could take years?
So long as the doomsday clock stands still, Marla, we have all the time in the world. January 1971. As the months went by, I found myself spending more and more time in my Antarctic hideaway, Karnak, principally continuing my detailed study of the quantum powers of Dr. Manhattan, but working to keep up with the rest of the news as well, some of it far more disturbing than most. President Nixon delivers a momentous address on TV.
So, after much heartfelt deliberation, I have decided to deploy Dr. Manhattan to the jungles of Vietnam to help deal with the unprecedented situation there.
It has finally happened. The damn fool has cried havoc and let slip the dogs of war. There is no turning back now. In early March, with Congress's approval, Dr. Manhattan finally appeared in Vietnam and set to work dealing with the situation as directly as he could. A gigantic Dr. Manhattan explodes soldiers as American choppers fly alongside him. 3 months later, what little remained of the Viet Cong army surrendered unilaterally to the great azure god who strode among them, wreaking inconceivable chaos. Now the entire world lived in terror of the United States. And, of course, of Dr. Manhattan, just as I'd predicted they would a decade before. Also, as predicted, the world's scientists moved the hands of the doomsday clock 1 minute closer to midnight. January 1975. As impossible as it may seem, things were about to get worse. Still riding a wave of approval for his Vietnam victory not seen in this country since Franklin Roosevelt's day, President Richard Nixon took unprecedented steps to solidify his position.
And I have today put before Congress a proposed constitutional amendment which, if passed, will permit me to run for a much-needed third term as your president.
And there you have it, Marla. Nixon and his cronies have finally, officially crossed the line. I'd like you to arrange a press conference here in my office for Friday. Make it as large as possible, please.
Any topic in particular, Adrian?
Let's just say there's something I need to get off my chest. So, that Friday, precisely on schedule. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for coming. I suppose you're all wondering why I called you here today, and why I'm using Adrian Veidt's office to do it. The sharper ones among you have probably already figured it out, but for the slower among you, he removes his mask. I am Adrian Veidt. Now, I am certain you all have questions, and I will be happy to answer what I can in the order asked. Yes, Mr. Roth?
Considering the current social instability in this country, why choose now of all times to give up your alter ego?
It's rather simple, actually. Once President Nixon unleashed Dr. Manhattan on Vietnam, the rest of us masks, quite honestly, became superfluous. He removes his costume to reveal a finely tailored suit. I've decided I can do a lot more good for the world as the head of a multi-billion-dollar business than I can as one lone costumed adventurer.
So this is all about the money?
Let's be utterly frank here, Douglas. In the end, isn't everything? With my no longer having to split my attention, I expect that Veidt Enterprises is about to become an even bigger player on the economic scene. While I found some perverse form of relief in giving up my life as Ozymandias, my erstwhile companions continued the good fight.
You're all scum and deserve to suffer.
Rorschach punches out a criminal as another swings a club at him.
And when the police finally arrived,
Not much for us to do.
Except help set the broken bones. John points his hand at a criminal. His gun flies apart in his hands.
not quite so brave with your weapon automatically disassembled, are you?
Don't hurt me! I surrender!
The police find a man wrapped in a bent streetlight.
I'm guessing Dr. Manhattan's been here.
You think? Silk Spectre kicks apart a thug's wooden bat.
Yeah. Just consider yourself lucky my boyfriend isn't with me.
The police find a bloody happy face button amidst bullet-ridden bodies.
Somebody better call the wagon. The comedian has been at it again.
The New York Gazette reads, April 12th, 1977. City Council denies cops raise.
In the spring of 1977, the police union started negotiations with the city council to procure their annual raise. The city council practically laughed in the cops' collective faces. Interesting. Apparently my costumed ex-compatriots have done so much to control the criminal element in this city, the city council doesn't feel that the police proper deserve their annual raise.
Well, this can't possibly end well.
I'm more than inclined to agree with you, Marla. The city council is being extraordinarily short-sighted in all this.
So what do you think will happen next?
I have my guesses. None of them good.
Another Gazette reads, April 17th, 1977. Cops say, let them do it.
2 days later, the New York City police force actively went on strike. Their official position was that since the city council put so much stock in the city's costumed community, it should fall to them to keep order in New York. It took less than 12 hours for rioting to break out all over the city.
The comedian rides on the outside of the owl ship as Dan addresses the crowd below through a loudspeaker.
Please, if everybody will just clear the streets.
All in all, it was a very ugly night. The costumes spread themselves out across the city to do what they could. But frankly, it was not nearly enough. In the Soho section of southern Manhattan, the rioting was particularly nasty. There was wholesale looting, massive amounts of vandalism, you name it. And since no one else seemed to be covering that neighborhood, I decided the responsibility was up to me.
A young boy spray paints on a wall. Who watches the Watchmen?
I wouldn't necessarily finish that if I were you.
Huh?
I mean, it is a reasonable question, but you're doing more damage than it's worth. The phrase comes from the Latin, quis custodiet ipsos custodes. The conceit is that even a city's guardians require supervision to keep them in line. Now, what say you put down that spray can?
Don't know who you are, mister, or what the hell you're talking about, but you come any closer, you're gonna regret it.
How sad. Out of the spotlight less than 2 years, and already people have started to forget about me. They called me Ozymandias. As I continued speaking to distract the boy, I slipped my trusty stiletto from its gauntlet and let fly. I will tolerate many things, son, but bold-faced threats are not one of them. The stiletto struck the spray can dead center, and it exploded right in the boy's face, as I'd intended.
Ah! In my eyes! Can't see!
You might remember this moment the next time you consider committing public vandalism. Right now, I have other places to be. I'd put on the costume again because I figured Ozymandias would be a more effective tool against the rioters than would Adrian Veidt. Besides, wearing that costume tonight could possibly provide other benefits. A block from the Tagger, I came across a gang of looters emptying an appliance store, and decided to do something about it. Gentlemen, I'm giving you exactly 30 seconds to return that merchandise to where you first found it.
Oh? And if we don't, pretty boy?
Then I'll just have to force you.
Ozymandias kicks a man in the chest and he drops the TV he's holding on his own head. Not surprisingly, the remaining looters restocked the store's shelves in less than 5 minutes. And the following morning, well, not surprisingly, the strike is over. The city council caved. Ironically, the damages from the rioting are going to cost the city God knows how many times more than just giving the police their raise would have.
A dollar says the irony is totally lost on them.
First rule, never bet against a sure thing.
And what about all the rumors going around about Ozymandias being seen around town during the rioting?
And that is exactly what they're going to remain. Merely rumors.
Adrian admires the toy version of his hero identity. Of course, should those rumors help to increase the sales of our new Ozymandias action figure line that hits store shelves tomorrow, well, so much the better then, isn't it? And the following week. Thank you for coming, Doctor. Nonsense. These sessions are designed to benefit all mankind. Have you made any progress in duplicating my teleportational abilities? No, but I honestly do believe we're getting closer. This machine is our latest step. Allow me to take a closer look. Dr. Manhattan holds the pieces of the machine apart and examines them. Extraordinary. Elementary. You are indeed closer, but not yet correct. Keep working at it, though. With your determination, I've complete confidence you will get it right eventually. He reassembles it. Now, if you'll excuse me, John teleports away. Dr. Manhattan was gone, as if he'd never truly been there. But still, the dozens of hidden cameras secreted all over the premises had recorded his every action, bringing me ever closer to my ultimate goal. Thank you, Doctor. You've absolutely no idea what a help you're being. While I hadn't yet been able to duplicate Manhattan's teleportational powers, I had made use of other things I'd learned from him. Lighter-than-air ships now filled the skies. Electric cars now cruised our streets, all thanks to the incredible blue-skinned being to whom the rules of nature seemed little more than suggestions.
Amazing, isn't it? You look around this city and see very little that hasn't had your hand in it.
All for the betterment of mankind, Marla. Unlike the passage of the Keene Act, I'm afraid. I can't help believing that outlawing all costume vigilantes who aren't under the government's direct control is going to come back to bite us on the butt someday. Adrian buys a paper from a street vendor.
Guess you got out while the getting was good, huh, Mr. Veidt?
That, my good fellow, remains to be seen. Chapter 6. Nothing beside remains. Audio autobiography concluded. Maintaining an almost constant electronic surveillance of the enigmatic Dr. Manhattan in hopes of ultimately understanding how his teleportational powers worked was a discomfiting experience at best. Though I always felt he was completely aware of what I was doing, it never ceased to irritate me that he didn't seem to care. To the quantum curiosity who claimed to live in all universes simultaneously, there was no difference between the past, present, or future. That which had already happened will always happen, as will that which had yet to occur. But I think it was the subtle, smug, knowing smile that barely touched the corners of his lips when he glanced toward my hidden cameras that bothered me the most. March 1981. The funeral of my faithful assistant Marla was a small, quiet affair. Basically just myself, her grieving parents, and a few of her closest friends, of which there weren't many. Farewell, Marla. You will be sorely missed. I honestly do not know how I will get along without you. Her sudden, unexpected death had been ruled an accident. On her way home from work the previous Friday, she had somehow stumbled in front of an oncoming city bus. Her passing was instantaneous.
We'd like to thank you for everything you did for our daughter, Mr. Veidt. Working for you was the great joy of her life.
There are no thanks necessary. Employing your daughter was my pleasure. She will be difficult to replace. You have my condolences. Now, if you will excuse me. Adrian gets in his car. My limousine pulled away from the cemetery, and I bid a silent goodbye to the fair Marla. Her death had been tragic, but necessary. In the end, she knew too much. And as my master plan grew closer to fruition, that could not be allowed. Boston, 1 month later, in a local Gunga diner. I thank you for meeting me here, Mr. Shea.
Well, when one of the world's wealthiest men asks to see you, you come. Big question is, what do you want with a lowly comic book creator that would bring you all the way to Beantown?
I have a project in the works that I believe might interest you, Max. May I call you Max?
You can call me Gomer if the project's right.
Very well, then. Basically, it is my intention to produce the greatest science fiction film ever made, and I would like you to help develop it. Sounds interesting. If you're serious.
As serious as the proverbial heart attack. There are, however, certain conditions that must be met if you're going to be involved.
Knew there'd be a catch. So what are they?
This will be like no film ever made before it, using a whole new technology. Thus, everyone involved in the project will have to be secluded for the duration of the film's production. And no one, absolutely no one, can know where you've gone or why.
Are you 9 kinds of nuts? I have a life here. People I care about who care about me. I can't just up and disappear on them.
I understand completely, which is why I'm prepared to pay you the following amount for your inconvenience.
Adrian writes on a piece of paper. Seriously, there's no amount of money that can...
Are you certain?
He shows it to Max. Can... So, when do we leave?
Max Shea was the last of the creative team I had determined I needed. Thus, several days later on my private Pacific island. First and foremost, I'd like to thank you all for your commitment. I know I'm paying you handsomely for your time, but I also know it could not have been easy for you to give up the lives you knew, even if only for a limited time.
Max Shea? I'm Hira Manish. How good to see you here.
Hira? Great to finally meet you in the flesh. Your artwork elevated a number of my stories in years past.
You're being too kind. Interesting group Mr. Veidt has assembled here, as well as various other artists and writers. I recognize some prominent scientific minds walking about. Just what sort of movie is he making, anyway?
Damned if I can figure it out. But if Veidt is paying everyone else here what he's paying me, there's no way in hell his movie will ever turn a profit.
Yeah, it's a lot like Howard Hughes making that Hell's Angels film back in the 20s.
Well, they don't call these guys insanely wealthy without reason.
And, now that you've all met one another, I suggest that you get promptly to work. I am, after all, not paying you to socialize.
Mr. Veidt, sir, if I might have a minute of your time?
Certainly, Professor Wickstein.
The professor questions the human brain they've been given to study, but Adrian reassures him that it came from a donated cadaver, and the reason behind it is for the realistic detail of the film.
Leaving my assembled film crew to their designated tasks, I returned to New York, and my so-called normal life.
You wanted all copies of all the morning papers, Mr. Veidt?
Yes, today and every day. Yvonne, was it?
Yes, sir. And thank you again for the opportunity to be your assistant.
Just remember, you have exceptional shoes to fill. My previous assistant, Marla, was an extraordinary young woman.
So you've told me several times already, sir.
Well, this is distressing.
What is, sir?
This headline in the Gazette. I've been anticipating this.
The Gazette reads, April 28th, 1981. Scientists move doomsday clock 1 minute closer to midnight. Adrian crushes the paper in his fist.
Tell my R&D team I'll be by to see them later this morning. Time, it appears, is suddenly of the essence. Thus, 90 minutes later.
And I'm pleased to report, Mr. Veidt, that the prototype for your next generation of electric car is working out even better than we'd planned. Twice the mileage on half the charge. It's passed every possible safety test with flying colors.
Excellent. I suggest you begin mass production immediately. But more importantly, how goes work on the Manhattan Project?
We're getting closer, sir, but we still haven't been able to duplicate the good doctor's teleportational abilities. Frankly, I'm afraid we need more sophisticated facilities to continue our research.
Fine. Just give me a detailed list of everything you need, and I will see to it you have it. At which point, I expect you to put every other project currently on your agenda on the back burner. The clock is ticking, gentlemen, and it is getting louder by the minute. 7 months later, in the heart of Midtown Manhattan,
Adrian cuts a ribbon with enormous novelty scissors.
And it is with great pride that I hereby declare open the New York Institute for Extraspatial Studies, where today's greatest scientific minds can devote their time and energy to solving the mysteries of the universe. Now, ladies and gentlemen, if you'd like, I will answer a few of your questions.
Mr. Veidt, Is there any truth to the rumors that you had this facility built specifically in an effort to duplicate the quantum powers of Dr. Manhattan?
Have you ever met Dr. Manhattan? Well, I've actually worked with him, and trust me on this, it would be like attempting to duplicate the details of your most surreal dream. An entertaining exercise, but ultimately an extraordinary waste of one's time. It's why they're called rumors. Next question. September 1984. After his latest and longest incarceration, Edgar Jacobi, better known to the world at large as the master criminal Moloch the Mystic, was released from prison due to a wholly unexpected parole. He was a different man this time, a truly broken man. Humbled, his shoulders stooped, his expression one of utter resignation, all of which was quickly about to change. Adrian greets Edgar in his old costume, as those are the clothes he would recognize him in. Hello, Edgar. I heard you were getting out today. I've been giving you a lot of thought lately, and the upshot is, everybody's entitled to a fresh start. So I thought I'd swing over, buy you a hot meal and a cup of coffee, and talk about your future. Suffice it to say, Jacobi was exceedingly receptive to my generous job offer, and my master plan moved one step closer to fruition. The full span of Edgar's working for Adrian, and his path getting to this point, can be seen in Moloch's series. I put together the details of the precipitating piece of the puzzle mostly through supposition and snatches of captured conversation. Apparently, a few weeks ago, the comedian, still in the employ of the U.S. government, was returning from some secret wetwork operation in Nicaragua. He was sitting alone in the airship that was transporting him, cleaning his weapons, when he had the unfortunate chance to glance out the window. Huh? And spotted a large freighter delivering supplies to my private island. The fuck? Surprised to even see the island, since it was no longer detailed on any map, he suspected it was a possible Sandinista base, and resolved to investigate as soon as possible. Several days later, apparently the comedian returned to the island in a small dinghy, and silently made his way ashore. Since he expected to find a secret Sandinista base there, I'm certain he relished leaving a considerable body count in his wake. I envisioned him moving stealthily across the campground, carefully avoiding any random shafts of moonlight, making his way to one of the more important-looking buildings. My later investigation confirmed that he rifled through my private files, read documents that were intended for my eyes only, and, unable to believe, let alone fully comprehend what he'd just read, he moved on to the island's largest warehouse, where his slowly growing nightmare was quickly confirmed.
Holy fucking mother of God!
Eddie finds Adrian's squid monster while it's still alive, its tentacles writhing in the air. In a cold sweat, born of blind terror, the comedian raced from the warehouse, having lost his perverted sense of humor for perhaps the first time in his angry life. Made his way quickly back to shore, whimpering all the way, I would like to imagine, struggling but failing to leave the memory of what he had just seen behind him. Eddie reaches his boat.
Come on, start the engine! Get us the fuck out of here!
Did you find what you were looking for, sir?
You don't want to know. Believe me, honest to Christ, you just don't fucking want to know.
Several days later, back home in New York, the comedian somehow found himself standing outside the meager West Side apartment of Edgar Jacobi. How long he must have stood there, considering, unmoving, even I will never know. But the sheer weight of his knowledge had clearly left him bent and broken. Edgar wakes up to find the comedian sitting on his bed in tears.
It's a joke. Solid joke. I mean, I thought I knew how the world was, but then I found out about this gag, this joke. You're part of it, Moloch, old pal. You know that? If I thought you did know, I'd kill you, you understand? Kill you. I mean, You fought that big blue geek. You know what his head's like. I tell you, who knows which way he'll jump if anybody messes with him. He just might. Nah, I don't want to think about it. Don't you got any booze in this place? I mean, what gets me? I need never looked out the airship window, never seen the goddamn island, never gotten involved. I mean, this joke. I thought I was the comedian, you know? Oh, God, I can't believe it. I can't believe anybody would do that. I mean, I done some bad things, but I never done anything like, I mean, what's funny? What's so goddamn funny? I don't get it. Somebody explain. Somebody explain it to me.
Adrian listens in on Eddie's confession, accompanied by the faithful Bubastis. Fortunately, just as a precaution, I'd had Jacoby's apartment wired for sound, though Jacoby himself would come to me the following morning to report all that had transpired. Well, that rather puts a large kink in our plans, doesn't it, my sweet Bubastis? Until now, the comedian had been at best an afterthought, but Edward Blake is the original loose cannon, and, knowing what he now knows, poses a considerable threat to the ultimate success of our endeavor. Poor Edgar, like Wally Weaver and Janie Slater before him, has already been seen to, though I may have to move up my timetable on trusting sad Jacoby now. I suppose there's really no choice but to deal with Blake, once and for all. We've come too far to let him spoil things now. It's an unfortunate step, but necessary. Believe me, Bubastis, uneasy lies the head that wears a crown. October 11th, 1985. I have returned to New York from my beloved Karnak.
Anything else you need tonight, Mr. Veidt?
No, thank you, Yvonne. Just see that these papers are properly filed. Then you're welcome to go home for the evening.
Done and done, sir. See you in the morning.
As soon as I am certain Yvonne is gone, I walk over to my personal bookcase, pull forward one particular book, then wait as the structure slides aside to reveal my private elevator. Shh. I have important business to transact tonight. Shh. Business that does not require an audience. As far as anyone is concerned, I am in my private office tonight, working late again, as usual. Where I am actually going, what I find it essential to do, remains for me alone to know. What I am about to do, I do with some reluctance, despite the long and rather unpleasant history between us. I do it because to not do it poses a considerable and wholly unnecessary threat to my ultimate plan, and that simply cannot be allowed. Ozymandias dons black attire to hide himself in the dark of the night, and drives out in a black car to commit his dark deed. 17 minutes later, allowing for crosstown traffic, I am parked near Edward Blake's East Side apartment complex. The building's facade is predominantly glass. Predominantly, but not entirely. It is difficult to find finger and toe holds, but not impossible. Adrian scales the outside of Eddie's building freehand. I have never liked Blake. At best, he is a complete and utter sociopath. At worst, and he is almost always at his worst, he is an extremely dangerous psychopath. Thus far, for whatever his own perverse reasons, he has told no one but Jacoby what he saw on my island, and I must take all necessary precautions to assure it remains that way. He reaches a balcony and enters. Blake is in his 60s now, but still poses a considerable physical threat. His continuing operation for the government as the comedian confirms that. But over the years, I've observed how he moves, how he reacts, how he fights. So I doubt that will prove a problem. He passes an old man and a woman in the hall. I stand silently, utterly motionless, outside his door for 5 more minutes after the elderly couple goes down in the elevator.
just to guarantee that we are alone. Then I take a deep, cleansing breath, and I strike.
Ozymandias kicks in the comedian's door in order to murder him.
Huh?
As I do, I realize there is a terrible sort of irony here. This time, it seems, it is my turn to tie up the final loose end. In Egypt's sandy silence, all alone, stands a gigantic leg which far off throws the only shadow that the desert knows. I am great Ozymandias, saith the stone, the king of kings. This mighty city shows the wonders of my hand. The city's gone, naught but the leg remaining to disclose the site of this forgotten Babylon. We wonder, and some hunter may express wonder like ours, when through the wilderness, where London stood holding the wolf in chase, he meets some fragment huge, and stops to guess what powerful but unrecorded race once dwelt in that annihilated place.
Horace Smith, written in competition with Percy B. Shelley. The end. So as you can see, the course of Adrian's life was set early and rarely deviated. While he may have the best of intentions on a conscious level, he is also blind to his own flaws and his own inhumanity. But he has also never known what it is to be a common man. His intellect sets him apart as much as John's blue skin does. I see him as the only other person with a genuine superpower in this universe. I'm not saying it's forgivable that he forgets the plight of the innocent as he prepares his own form of world conquest, but I do think this story makes it more understandable. It's ironic that he's shocked at seeing Dr. Manhattan use his power to kill, when he would one day far surpass him in that regard. But I also feel that seeing his journey humanizes him, to as great a degree as is possible anyway, and you can see from the process of his thinking how he felt he had no other choice. Although if you'd like my personal opinion on the matter, I have a pair of old Nerd Rant videos up on the subject of Rorschach being the true hero of Watchmen, and a second part focused on how Adrian is the true villain. And the short version is that I don't think nuclear war was as imminent or unavoidable as he thought, and that in fact his act was a rash mistake. My main point in proving this is the Black Freighter story within the world, and how it mirrors Adrian's moral journey. The man rushes to his hometown, certain that pirates have already overtaken it, and commits disastrous deeds, only to find he has damned himself with only love as his guide, because the danger he foresaw never came to pass. Adrian even dreams about this story, seeing himself as the man swimming towards the Black Freighter, and I think this was Alan very intentionally judging him for his immoral actions, despite how open-ended his conversation with John leaves things. Feel free to watch them if you'd like to hear the full arguments. In any case though, that will do it for this one. I hope you've enjoyed this story and will enjoy the other series should you choose to watch them, and that all of them will only enhance your enjoyment of the original work. The next series I'll tackle will be Dr. Manhattan's, and the part of it which occurs in actual reality serves as a companion to Adrian's story, filling in John's side of their relationship a bit more, but most of it will be wacky timeline antics, as I did mention that John happens to fracture the concept of progressive time. Well, until next time, as we know it, take care out there, and as always, thanks for watching.